song this morning is going to be 326. 326. Let's stand this song. Sing the first and the third. What a fellowship, what a joy divine, leaning on the everlasting arms. What a blessedness, what a peace is mine, leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning on the everlasting arms. What am I to dread? What have I to fear? Leaning on the everlasting arms. I am blessed in peace when my wants are near. Leaning on the everlasting arms. Leaning, safe and secure from all alarms. Leaning, singing on the everlasting arms. Please be seated. Marking Psalm books 578. You can get that as a song indication. 578.
So the last several weeks, we talked about Abraham and the call of Abraham, his obedience to God, and what a blessing. That takes place in Genesis chapter 12. Many of you are probably familiar with the fact of Genesis chapter 11. You may or may not be, so I'm going to make sure that we touch on it. Genesis chapter 11, verse 4, up to that point, God had told mankind to be fruitful and multiply and to go out through all the earth. But they decided near Babel to sit down and stay. It said in verse 4 of chapter 11, "Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches to the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered over the face of the whole earth." And these are just different renditions of what the Tower of Babel looked like. This is in Urek. I can't pronounce it right, but that is one that they think resembles it. These are just some other artist renditions and what have you. But don't miss the point that God had encouraged them and told them, commanded man, to go. Right? To go. And be fruitful, multiply, and fill the land. They decided to stay and make a name for who? Themselves. And so often in life, as men, we do that. As women, we do that. We get this idea, what can I do to make myself look good, to make my name great? For all different kinds of reasons. Social media, in a lot of ways, which was originally to connect people, and still does some of that, has really become for a lot of people a platform to make a name for themselves, to make their name great. Doesn't make it wrong, but we have this, this innate desire, I think, built within us sometimes, that we want to rise above. And oftentimes, like at Babel, in doing so, we find ourselves at a crossroads in contrary to what God has called us to be and to be about. So, trust the Lord with all your heart, lean not on your own understanding. They didn't trust in God. Abraham did. They did. Chapter before, right? And just a couple of chapters before that, you had Noah's Ark, where an entire population of the world, save 8 people, were destroyed. Making it about themselves. We get this idea sometimes that we know better than God. Maybe when you were younger, maybe even now, you think you know better than your parents. You know better than your teachers. You know better than your counselors. You know better than your employers. Man, you know better than that. You know better than your doctors sometimes, right? We've all been there, done that, I think. And we get to this place like we think we know it all. God says one woman. Sometimes we want 2, 3, or 4 women. God says don't get drunk. You think it's okay. God says don't pornography, sexual immorality. We're going to do it. Somehow it's not going to affect us. My point is, when we start leaning on our understanding, it's like when you go fishing, the fish bites the hook, and sometimes you can get the hook out pretty easy. But sometimes we, just like that fish, will swallow that hook all the way down to our gut. And the only way to get that hook out is going to hurt. And it's going to hurt bad. But God's the one that makes our paths straight. He's the one that comes in and gives us the right direction. And so in Genesis 12, 1 through 4, we've read it the last few weeks. The Lord said to Abram, who became Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." Verse 4, Abram went, as the Lord had told him. And Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. It's good. Now, it's in contrast, really, with chapter 11, where the people didn't do what God said. And now in chapter 12, you have Abram, who becomes Abraham, doing exactly what God said. One is called faithlessness, the other is called faith. So Abraham is this man of faith. He's a man who's the father, if you will, of Israel, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob becomes Israel, the 12 tribes. We are grafted in as children of Israel, spiritual Israel. We even sing a song called Father Abraham had many
sons.
And
Father Abraham.
And I am
one of them.
And so are
you.
So, I mean, how many thousands of years ago he lived when we sing that song? Because of his faithfulness. But along the way, he wasn't always faithful. Abraham, flesh and blood, just like you and me, answered and believed God's promises. And he was following that straight path. But sometimes, just like you and me, Abraham started listening to people around him. In this case, his wife. But I think also started listening to the conversation going on in his own head. God, you told me you were going to bless me and bless the world through me and my seed. I don't have a son yet. I'm getting older. Sarah's pushing 100. You know, what are we going to do here? And so he went about his own way and became disobedient to God and had a relationship with Hagar. And thus we get Ishmael, who ultimately we get Islam from. Didn't follow the path. And every time we get off the path and do things our own way, it may not be Ishmael, but we start ripples, if you will, that affect other people's lives in a negative way. And in doing so, we affect our own. But when Abraham was walking with God and was being who God called him to be, just like you and I, when we step out and do what God has called us to be about in faith, those ripples are going to affect other people's lives in a positive way as well. It may not seem like it at first, but no discipline at the time seems good. But when we're trained by it, what happens? We become something that we're supposed to be. So in Genesis chapter 22, 1 through 18 is where we're going to be. And I know that sometimes reading through large chunks of Scripture can be boring. At least it is for me when I'm the one sitting in the chair. If I'm being honest. But I've talked with several of you over the last several years and other places that I've been. And what I've come to realize is Bible stories that I know, in many ways, like the back of my hand, not everybody does. They may know different stories that I don't, but in some cases, things that you and I may take for granted, I'll just remember my whole life. Somebody else hasn't. So we're going to read the whole section. Okay, so just bear with me on this. Sometime later, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham, here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." Now I'm going to make some comments along the way, some thoughts I want to give to you. Maybe you thought about them, maybe you haven't. But one of the things I want us to see is sometime later God tested Abraham. When Jesus came up out of the water, he said, "This is my son whom I'm well pleased." Right? Right after that, Jesus is led into the wilderness to be tested. So God doesn't just test mankind, he tests himself, if you will, in how he tested Jesus. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son." We know that Jesus is the only begotten Son of God. His special son, the son of promise. Isaac is the son of promise to Abraham. There's some overlap here, Will, some imagery that looks forward ultimately to Jesus the Christ, some would say, and sacrifice in there. Now, if you're a mom or a dad, regardless of how long you had to wait for your son, it goes without saying that to sacrifice my child, I don't think so. I mean, remember, we've seen Abraham be faithful, and we've seen him be unfaithful numerous times in the story. Like when he lied about Sarah being his sister instead of his wife, when they were in Egypt. Now, I want to stop here for a second because I want to make it personal. This morning, the reality is many of us are faithful to God. In fact, I want to say all of us are. Give us all the benefit of the doubt that we are walking in lockstep with God, being who he has called us to be. And it might not be your son or daughter he's asking you to offer up. But there's something. Some of you know what it is, some of you don't know what it is. For some of us, there's that little voice in the back of our head and our heart that says, you know, I really need to lay this aside so that I can be who God's called me to be. I just don't know that I want to. And there's that internal battle. That's kind of carried over to what's going on here. But I want you to see the connection. That there's this sacrifice. God's not calling you to sacrifice your son this morning. That I'm aware of. But there is a sacrifice he's calling for. Early the next morning, now back up. Sometime later, God tested. Here I am, the very next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. When God called him, he didn't put it off. How often does mankind, when God calls us to do something, I'll do it when I'm ready. I'll do it when I'm comfortable. I'll do it when I know more. I'll do it when I want to. You know what? I don't think I'm going to do it. Abraham, being called to sacrifice his only begotten son, if you will, from the standpoint the son of promise, didn't waste any time this time. He got to it, got onto it, being who God had called him to be right off the bat. Here's why I think that's important. Have you ever noticed that when there's something, you don't really want to do it, but you know it needs to be done, and you start putting it off, and then you put it off, and then you put it off, and by putting it off, it becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger pain you have to deal with. It causes more turmoil. It causes more stress. It never goes away. It's the back of your mind. You're like, I did it, but you just don't want to. And other times, there's things you don't want to do, but you get up and go do it, and you're glad you did. Abraham didn't waste any time. It's early the next morning. He got up, loaded his donkey, took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he set out for the place God told him about. On the, what day? Third day. I'm just making some connections, okay? What day did Jesus rise?
Third day.
Third day. Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over." Now, put yourself in Abraham's shoes. This is the third day, right? He's going up. So for at least 3 days, 2 days, he's seen the place God's taking him. He knows what's lying ahead. He knows what has to be done. You think he's full of joy? Or do you think he's full of turmoil? He's faithful, but I'm telling you, you can be faithful and have turmoil. How do I know that? Jesus is in the garden being faithful, saying if there's any other way, then let thy will be done. Right? On the third day he looked up and saw the place in the distance, and he said to his servant, stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over. The Father is with the Son. Many people will tell you that God was not with Jesus at the cross. I don't believe it. I could be wrong, but I don't believe it. Read Psalm 22 for clarification. I'll leave it at that this morning. We will worship, and then who will come? We will come back to you. So Abraham is looking at going to offer up Isaac, not as just a sacrifice. He's understanding that a burnt offering is a sign of worship. I'm going to worship my God. Now some of you may know this, you may not. A burnt offering requires the priest that's doing it, the one that's doing the animal, to cut it up and shred it up to nothing. So Abraham's not just stabbing his son. He knows to do it the way God requires, is to totally butcher his body. This is not just a one and done. This is a completely involved situation. You can look in Leviticus to understand that. But he says, we'll come back. Now we read a week or two ago that in Hebrews chapter 11, that Abraham understood that God could bring Isaac back from the dead. Why? Because in his mind, he's thinking, God promised that he's going to bless the world through my son. My son's not done anything yet. I don't understand it. Now this is where we get in trouble, right? When we don't understand stuff, we can't see where it's going, we start making our own way. And we can all find people who will justify us going our own way. I think Abraham learned his lesson. And now he's choosing to stay on the path. Not leaning on his understanding, because his understanding, just like us, gets us in trouble most of the time. I don't know how a man can stay the path knowing that at the end of this hill, I'm going to offer my son, other than a relationship with God. Not just knowledge about God, which helps, right? Because the more I know about someone, the deeper my relationship can be, the more intimate my relationship can be. Abraham's already experienced faithfulness of God on the good side and the bad side. He got discipline. He's seen God keep his promises. God has walked with him. He knows what it is to walk with God. He knows what it is to walk away from God. And my guess is that everybody in this room, with the exception of maybe there's little bitty babies right there, know the same thing. You don't have to be a Bible scholar to know. You feel it in your spirit, don't you? When you're walking in step with God and when you're not. Something to think about. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac. Just out of curiosity, when Jesus was led away from being whipped and beaten, what did he carry?
A cross.
A cross made of
Wood.
and placed it on his son Isaac. God placed the cross on his son, Jesus. And he himself carried the fire and the knife. Who? The Father did. As the two of them went together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father Abraham, how do you think he worded it? Hey, Dad, what's up? Father? Or do you think it was more than wisdom? Hey, Dad, what's going on? We're going up here. We got the fire and the wood. But Dad, where's the lamb? We've come all this way and we don't have lamb for the burnt offering. Jesus is the one of God.
The lamb.
God. Isaac's putting two and two together here. He was born for a purpose, and so was Jesus. So were you and I. Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb with the burnt offering, my son. For this sacrifice, God's going to provide the lamb. And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar there and arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar, on top of the wood. You can almost hear the spikes going into Jesus' hands and feet. What about that? Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. I don't think it was a Abraham, Abraham. I think it was more than one. Abraham! Y'all with me? Abraham! Here I am, Lord. You know he was waiting for that voice. You ever done something you don't really want to do, but you know it's got to be done? You keep looking, somebody will stop me. Somebody, please, somebody stop this. I don't want to do this. Somebody stop me. Bro, I got to do it. Abraham, I think, was at that point. But it's not when he grabs a knife. It's not when he holds it. It's when he's coming to slay. It's another word for kill. Do not lay a hand on the boy, he said. Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God. There's a healthy respect and honor for who God is. There's also, as somebody asked me not long ago, is it wrong to not want to go to hell and fear God? Is that a good enough reason? I said, well, the fear of the Lord is beginning of wisdom. It's a good place to start. Because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son. Question. Don't answer it out loud. What are you withholding from God? Because you all have something. At some point in your life, we've all been in a place where we're withholding something. Sometimes it's not just sin, okay? But there is that time we get to sin and we're just enjoying it. It started off, it bothered us for a while, but we become callous to it. You know, the worry, the fear of God goes away, and it's just like, man, I'm loving this. Yeah, that's cool. And we justify it. Oh, I'll get right before God comes back. Or if nobody sees me, it's okay. When we do that, our hearts begin to die. Our relationships begin to die. We begin to get cold and separate. But when we walk in step with God, and we give Him everything, because it's all His anyway, right? It releases, at least for me, it releases that fear. It releases stress. Because I go back and remember the times God's been there for me. Just like I'm sure Abraham did over the course of his life leading up to the sacrifice of Isaac. God is faithful. And when I reside in God's faithfulness, I know a couple of things. One, He's going to do what He says He's going to do. He's going to rescue me. But if I turn my back on God, He's going to allow me to be separate. He's going to allow me to go to heaven. My choice, not His. But because you have not withheld your son from me, your only son, Abraham looked up, and there in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. Now, just for those who might think, "Oh, this is coincidence," I don't believe so at any level. This place was picked out long ago. The time and the location, and at the exact time that God's talking to him, the lamb shows up. Not coincidence. It's the impact of what God is doing in the providence of God. So Abraham called that place, "The Lord will provide." I think it's important for us to look back on the areas where God has protected us, God has guided us, God has got us out of our own troubles. How many times have we messed up royally and not got caught when we should have? I mean, you're working a job, somebody got fired, and look at them. Really, God, they didn't know I did it too. A little sister, little brother got in trouble. Yeah, they got what they deserve. You've done the same thing. Or somebody who's living a sinful life. You're thinking, yeah, I'm not like that anymore. All the while we are. The point is, God provides. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge those times in our life where God provides. God provided him a son. God provided him a new name, Abraham. God provided him the place to go to sacrifice. God provided the lamb. God gives everything that we need when we need it. Maybe not when we want it, but when we need it, it's there. And to this day, on the mountain of the Lord, it will be what? Provided. And Jesus himself was sacrificed. God provided. The angel of the Lord called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, I swear by myself, declares the Lord. Jesus did that too, by the way, in the New Testament. That because you have done this and not withheld your son, don't miss it, because you not withheld your son, you've been obedient to me, your only son, God's only son, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sands on the seashore. Here's my point. If Abraham had not been faithful, God would have found somebody else who was. So you may be around people who choose not to be faithful. Don't let that direct your steps. Realize that God is faithful and he will raise up the ones that he needs to do what he wants done. It still comes down to our choice, though. He says, I will surely bless you and make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as the sea of the seashore. So just we'll stop. If you're a descendant of Abraham, raise your hand. If you're a child of God, you're a descendant of Abraham. Quite a few people, right? Your descendants will take possession of the cities of their enemies. That's the land of Canaan. And through your offspring, all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Why? Because you have obeyed me. It's through Jesus the Christ, a descendant of Abraham, that all the world and all of mankind is blessed. If not through Abraham, God would have found another way.
Why did you come all the way out here? The shepherd leaves the 99 on the mountain to search for the one that went astray.
Over to me. Never-ending, reckless love of God. Never-ending, reckless love of God.
We're not saved because of Isaac. We are saved because of Jesus Christ, the true Lamb of God. So I have me, I'm going to ask you all to read this with me this morning. In response to Yahweh's love for me,
This week I must identify my Isaac and lay them to the altar.
let's stand and sing.